Greetings to everyone who cares about their health or the health of their loved ones. Today, we'll calmly and clearly address one of the most frequently asked questions. Why does blood pressure often fluctuate after age 65, and what can actually be done about it? We'll separate myths from facts, explore the physiological causes, and discuss real, effective control strategies rather than simply treating symptoms. Today, on the shelf of any craft bar or store, you'll inevitably encounter a contrast. On one side, crystal-clear bottles of classic lager. On the other, cloudy, almost opaque containers of craft IPA or wheat beer. Turbidity has become a visual marker, a kind of seal of quality in the eyes of many consumers. This phenomenon is directly linked to the global trend toward everything natural, organic, and as unprocessed as possible. The marketing logic is simple and compelling. If the beer isn't filtered, it retains all the healthiest and tastiest ingredients. It's alive and genuine. But is this really true? Is unfiltered beer a guaranteed path to a higher quality, tastier, and healthier product? Or are we dealing with a clever marketing ploy that exploits our natural desire to find something pure and genuine in a world of mass production? The purpose of this article is to dissect this popular myth, separating marketing narratives from technological and biochemical realities. We won't claim that all unfiltered beer is bad or that filtration is an absolute blessing. Instead, we'll examine the processes that occur in beer before instead of and after filtration. The key thesis we'll explore is this. Unfilteredness per se is not a goal or a synonym for quality. It's simply one parameter, a technological choice whose consequences can be both positive and negative. True naturalness and depth of flavor are born much earlier in the selection of malt, hops, yeast, and the brewer's skill during the brewing and fermentation process. Blind faith in a cloudy glass can lead to disappointment when the attractive packaging conceals an unstable product with a dull or worse, flawed flavor. Let's explore together from the historical background of filtration to the biochemistry of turbidity and practical advice on choosing so that your next choice is informed and your enjoyment is complete. To understand the significance of abandoning filtration, we must first understand what this process is and what problems it solved. Historically, beer has always been cloudy. Medieval monks brewing ales or German burghers making lagers never dreamed of the crystal clarity that became the standard for mass-market brands in the 20th century. Cloudiness caused by yeast, proteins, and hop residue was natural and accepted as a given. This situation began to change with the development of microbiology and chemistry in the 19th century. The Industrial Revolution, urban growth, and the need to transport beer over long distances demanded a longer shelf life. Cloudy beer with active yeast and organic matter was biologically unstable. It could continue to ferment in the bottle, altering its flavor, or worse, develop foreign microorganisms leading to spoilage. Moreover, consumers' aesthetic preferences also evolved. A clear golden drink looked more attractive and clean from a hygienic standpoint, which was especially important in the era before the discovery of pasteurization and an understanding of the role of bacteria. This is how filtration technology was born. Its essence lies in the physical removal of solid particles larger than a certain threshold, usually 0.55 microns, from finished beer. To achieve this, the beer is passed through a porous material. Several methods have been widely used historically and are still widely used today. Cucarmic plates are filters that use diatomaceous earth kieselguhr, the fossilized remains of diatoms, as a filter material. This powder creates a microscopic labyrinth that traps yeast and large protein molecules. Cartridge filters use synthetic materials, cellulose, polypropylene, with a strictly defined pore size. What exactly does filtration remove? Primarily yeast cells, which settle to the bottom after their life cycle, but can be stirred. Secondly, high molecular proteins and polyphenols, tannins, which when bound together form insoluble flocks that cause so-called chill haze when the beer becomes cloudy as it cools. Thirdly, the smallest particles of hops and malt. The benefits of such an intervention for breweries, especially large ones, are obvious. Chief among them is stability. Filtered beer doesn't form a large sediment deposit, and its flavor and aroma remain unchanged throughout its stated shelf life, which can be measured in months. It's predictable. Buying a bottle of a well-known brand in Berlin, Tokyo, or New York, the consumer receives a product that is absolutely identical in taste and appearance. This is the foundation of the business model of global brewing companies. Filtration also allows for a clear separation of production stages. Fermentation and secondary fermentation are completed in tanks, after which the beer is filtered, becoming biologically stable and then bottled. This simplifies logistics and quality control. Thus, filtration arose not as a whim, but as a response to specific technological challenges, increasing shelf life, ensuring microbiological safety, and creating a visually appealing standardized product for the mass market. Its widespread adoption was one of the reasons for the dominance of light lagers worldwide for much of the 20th century. Having understood why beer is filtered, let's move on to the main question: what remains in the beer if this process is omitted? Turbidity, or as professionals call it, haze, is more than just a homogeneous suspension. It's a complex mixture of various components, each of which contributes to the appearance, flavor, aroma, and stability of the drink. Understanding the composition of this turbidity is key to determining whether it is a sign of quality or defect. The first and most obvious component is yeast. After primary fermentation is complete, millions of yeast cells remain in the wort. In unfiltered beer, they remain, gradually settling to the bottom of the bottle, forming that thick sediment. On the one hand, this yeast can be a source of B vitamins. On the other, it is a major factor in instability. Live yeast can continue to metabolize slowly, which in an unopened bottle leads to a gradual change in flavor. Worse, with prolonged storage or improper conditions, the yeast cells die and a process of autolysis, self-digestion, begins. The products of yeast autolysis impart unpleasant, meaty, yeasty, sulfuric, or even rubbery tones to the beer, which destroy any original flavor. Therefore, the shelf life of unfiltered beer is almost always shorter, and it must be stored especially carefully, upright. Upright, in the dark, and at a consistently low temperature. The second most important source of cloudiness is protein and polyphenol complexes. This is a chemical, not biological factor. Protein molecules from malt and polyphenols, tannins from the malt husk, and especially from hops, are naturally present in wort. As the beer cools, the bonds between them intensify, forming particles that are invisible at room temperature but larger as they cool, scattering light. This phenomenon is called chill haze. This type of cloudiness is often considered undesirable even for many styles of unfiltered beer, as it doesn't impart a distinct flavor but can add excessive astringency, making the beer harsh. During filtration or clarification, brewers aim to remove or reduce this type of cloudiness. The third component, particularly relevant to modern craft beer styles, especially IPAs and APAs, is hop particles. During aggressive dry hopping, when large quantities of hops are added to a nearly finished beer for aroma, tiny plant particles and essential oils are released into the beer in an undissolved form. These particles create a persistent, often very thick haze, sometimes called chill fog or juice haze. Unlike protein haze, this suspended matter is intentional. It directly contributes to the powerful hop aroma, the citrusy, pine, tropical, for which the style was created. However, there is a downside. Excessive amounts of these particles can produce a strong, harsh, green, herbal bitterness that isn't fully balanced during the boil. Thus, the haze of unfiltered beer is always a compromise and always a lottery. It can be a flavor driver, as in a hoppy IPA, a traditional characteristic like yeast sediment in a German Gefällt or a Belgian Witbier, or it can also be a sign of technological flaws or instability. The next logical step is to understand how modern brewers, who have abandoned coarse filtration, still control this process to prevent their beer from becoming an unpredictable substance with an uncertain future. This will be covered in the next chapter, where we'll discuss what is done to beer instead of filtering. A common misconception is that brewers have only two options: coarsely filter their beer or leave it in a completely wild, unprocessed state. In practice, there is a whole spectrum of clarification and stabilization methods, all falling somewhere in between. Many beers proudly labeled unfiltered actually undergo these processes. The first important terminological distinction is between unfiltered and unclarified beer. Almost all commercial beer, even the cloudiest craft beer, is clarified to some degree. The brewer's goal is not to achieve crystal clarity, but to remove unwanted coarse sediment and stabilize the flavor while preserving as much body and aroma as possible. The main biological method that has replaced or complemented mechanical filtration is controlled cooling and fining or fining. This process has been around for centuries and utilizes natural substances. After primary fermentation is complete, the beer is rapidly cooled to near freezing. This stage is called culling. At low temperatures, yeast, proteins, and polyphenols lose their solubility and begin to precipitate as a flocculent sediment. To accelerate and improve this process, coagulants are added to the chilled beer. They act like microscopic magnets, attracting suspended particles and forming larger, heavier flocks that quickly settle to the bottom of the tank. The range of these substances varies and depends on the brewery's philosophy. Bentonite is a natural clay with a negative charge that attracts positively charged proteins. Gelatin, of animal or, less commonly, plant origin, works on a similar principle. A traditional fining agent in British brewing is isinglass, obtained from the swim bladders of sturgeon. It is considered a very gentle and effective fining agent, especially for ales. Recently, plant and mineral alternatives such as diatomaceous earth in suspension or silica gel have gained popularity. The advantage of fining over coarse filtration is its selectivity. These substances primarily bind unstable proteins and some of the polyphenols that cause chill haze, but to a much lesser extent affect the molecules responsible for the beer's body and aroma profile. Yeast is also actively sedimented, but the process occurs more naturally without mechanical action, which, according to some brewers, can strike off the aroma. However, the most important work in creating a stable and tasty beer, whether filtered or not, occurs much earlier during the mashing and boiling stages. The quality of the raw materials is the primary factor. Using well-malted, low-protein barley reduces potential haze. Controlling the mashing process, holding the wort at specific temperatures, allows enzymes to break down long protein chains into more stable fractions. Properly boiling the wort with hops promotes the coagulation of unwanted proteins. They form the so-called hot wort, which are then removed. Thus, the brewer's skill lies not in removing excesses later, but in avoiding the creation of an excess of unstable components in the first place. So, when you see unfiltered on the label, it most likely means the beer hasn't been filtered through ceramic plates or cartridge filters, but it has almost certainly undergone cold settling and possibly soft fining. This isn't deception, but a modern technological approach that achieves a balance between naturalness, flavor, and commercial stability. The brewer controls the haze, retaining the type needed for the style, yeast or hops, and removing the type that detracts from the flavor and appearance, protein. This is a conscious and complex choice, not simply eliminating one production step. Let's move on to the most important aspect for consumers. How does unfiltered beer affect its sensory properties and whether it offers any real health benefits? The main marketing myth revolves around taste and health benefits, so maximum objectivity is essential. Let's start with taste and texture. The claim that unfiltered beer always tastes better is a gross oversimplification. The effect on flavor directly depends on the specific components remaining in the beer. If we're talking about yeast sediment in a properly fermented and fresh German Keller beer, it can add light bready, sometimes slightly fruity, notes, making the flavor fuller and more rounded. In the case of modern IPAs, where the haze is created by hop particles from dry hopping, the effect can be very pronounced. The aroma becomes explosive and concentrated with bright citrus, tropical, or pine notes that literally float above the glass. However, the same hop suspension, when used in excess, can produce a harsh, green, grassy bitterness that cuts the palate and masks more subtle flavor nuances. If the haze is caused by protein and polyphenol complexes, it's usually a negative. Such a beer can have excessive astringency, an astringent sensation similar to strong tea, and seem rough and unbalanced. As for texture or body, unfiltered beer, due to the long-chain proteins and polysaccharides remaining in suspension, often has a denser, oilier, and sometimes even creamier texture. This can be a plus for some styles, such as an oatmeal stout, and a minus for others, a light and refreshing pilsner. Thus, the effect on flavor is not an automatic improvement, but a complex result that can range from much more interesting to significantly worse, depending on the brewer's skill and the original intent. Now, let's address one of the most persistent myths, that unfiltered beer is live. This is a critical misunderstanding. The term live beer in professional usage refers not to the presence of suspended matter, but to the presence of viable, active yeast in the bottle. This beer undergoes bottle conditioning, where a small amount of sugar and fresh yeast are added after bottling. The yeast consumes this sugar, producing carbon dioxide, which naturally carbonates the beverage. This is truly a live product that continues to evolve in the bottle. However, the vast majority of unfiltered beer on the market is simply unfiltered after primary fermentation in the tank. It does contain yeast, but it is mostly dead or inactive. It does not undergo bottle conditioning. Its carbon dioxide is the result of artificial carbonation. Therefore, the label unfiltered is in no way the same as live or bottled. These are different technological processes with different consequences. Finally, let's consider the health benefits often exploited in advertising. The main argument is that unfiltered beer retains B vitamins, primarily from yeast, and antioxidants, primarily polyphenols from hops and malt. Yes, this is a fact. However, the extent of these benefits is greatly exaggerated. The amount of vitamins you can get from a single bottle of beer is incomparable to the content in standard foods, such as whole grain bread, meat, or legumes. As for antioxidants, many are soluble compounds and remain in beer even after filtration. Moreover, some of the polyphenols removed during filtration or clarification are precisely those same tannins, which, in excess, can negatively impact digestion. The main healthy components of beer, which are the subject of scientific debate, are soluble fiber, beta-glucans, and silicon, which promotes bone health. Their content depends primarily on the recipe and malt variety, not on the fact of filtration. Therefore, it's impossible to argue that unfiltered beer is significantly superior in terms of health benefits. Its potential benefits are disproportionate to the main drawback of any alcohol, the toxic effects of ethanol and its metabolites on the body. Viewing beer, even the most natural, as a source of health is a profound misconception. Its value lies in its cultural, social, and gastronomic aspects, not its therapeutic ones. Now that we understand the nature of turbidity, we can move on to practical applications. How can the average consumer distinguish high-quality unfiltered beer from defective beer or dishonest marketing? Which styles are inherently turbid, and in which cases is turbidity a warning sign? And how should one handle such a product to get the most out of it? Let's start by choosing by style. There are categories where unfiltered beer is traditional, expected, and even essential. A classic example is German unfiltered lagers, Keller beer, Cellar beer, and Zwickel beer. Their turbidity comes from yeast, and the flavor is distinguished by a lively, bready mineral freshness. Hefeweizen, German wheat beers, whose characteristic turbidity and clove and banana aromas are created by special yeast strains that remain in the beer, also belong here. Belgian styles such as wit beer, a beer flavored with coriander and orange zest, and many Trappist ales are also often unfiltered, adding complexity and drinkability. In the modern craft beer scene, unfiltered beer has become synonymous with many IPAs and APAs, particularly in the New England IPAs, NAPAs, and hazy IPAs. Their succulent, opaque texture and tropical aroma are the result of intensive dry hopping and the use of specialized malts and yeasts. In these cases, haze is not a side effect, but a deliberate goal. However, there are styles where haze should raise concerns. These include, first and foremost, clean lagers focused on malt or hop flavor, classic Pilsner, Czech Premium Pale Lager, Helles, and American Light Lager. Their philosophy is crystal clarity, allowing one to appreciate the purity of flavor and brilliant color. Turbidity in such beers most often indicates a technological error, such as incomplete yeast sedimentation or bacterial infection, which will almost certainly affect the flavor, imparting yeasty, cloudy, or off flavors. It's also worth being cautious with strong styles like Imperial Stout or barley wine. They may have a natural body, but pronounced haze can indicate instability. When choosing a specific bottle, pay attention not only to the unfiltered label, but also to other details. Freshness is a crucial factor. For unfiltered IPAs, APAs, and wheat beers, look for the bottling date and buy the freshest. The shelf life of such beers rarely exceeds 3 to 6 months. The brewery's reputation is your best guide. Well-known, respected producers carefully control the clarification and stabilization processes, even foregoing filtration. Read the description on the label. A reputable producer will often indicate the cause of the cloudiness, such as yeast or dry hopped, which indicates a conscious choice. After purchase, storage, and serving conditions are critical. Unfiltered beer should be stored upright. This minimizes the contact area between the beer and the sediment at the bottom and slows any potential yeast autolysis. Store in a cool, dark place, 4 to 10 days, without fluctuating temperatures. Do not shake the bottle before serving. Carefully open it and begin pouring into a clean, dry glass. A tall, narrow Weizen is often used for wheat beers, and a tulip-shaped glass for IPAs in one firm motion. When there is about a centimeter of beer left in the bottle, stop. This will contain concentrated sediment. You can either pour it out, or if you prefer a more intense yeast flavor, as is common with Hefeweizen, for example, gently swirl the remainder and add it to the glass. Drink this beer immediately without letting it warm up in your hand for too long. By following these simple rules, you'll significantly increase the chances that your unfiltered beer experience will be a positive one. You'll be able to appreciate the nuances of flavor and texture that the brewer sought with this technological choice, avoiding the disappointment of a spoiled or poor quality product. Remember, turbidity isn't magic dust, but a tool, and its appropriateness depends on the context. So, what have we learned from our analysis? The key takeaway is that unfiltered beer is not synonymous with quality, naturalness, or superiority. It's simply a process choice, one of many along the brewer's journey from malt to glass. This choice can be made to achieve specific goals, enhancing hop aroma in an IPA, preserving a traditional character in a Keller beer, or adding body. However, behind this choice lies not the absence of processing, but often the more subtle and complex work of clarifying, stabilizing, and controlling the haze composition. The phrase unfiltered on the label merely signifies the omission of one specific step, but it provides no indication of what other processing steps the beer has undergone, or more importantly, the quality of the original brew. Therefore, the final piece of advice for any beer lover is to develop your own taste and knowledge, not trust specific marketing slogans. Focus primarily on the brewery's reputation and the freshness of the product. Try different styles, compare, and learn to recognize nuances of flavor. Ask yourself, do I enjoy the rich hop aroma of a hazy New England IPA? Or do I appreciate the clean, transparent bitterness and malty sweetness of a classic Pilsner? Both are worthy choices, as long as you make an informed decision. Diversity ultimately wins. It's precisely because some brewers filter and others don't, and because some styles demand boldness and others complexity, that we have an incredibly broad and interesting beer palette. Appreciate this diversity, drink mindfully, drink with pleasure, and remember that true naturalness in beer is born not at the moment the filter is removed, but in copper kettles, where malt, hops, water, and yeast meet under the master's control to begin their ancient magical work.